Okay, maybe just before we move on, I will say, as I say when I do board of directors training or speak with people around roles and responsibility of directors, this can be scary. I mean, if you're used to just being a member in a cooperative and suddenly you're going to sit on the board, the level of responsibility can be quite intimidating for people. And my goal in providing this information is not to scare the crap out of people. It's certainly not the intention of what I'm trying to do here, but it's important to know that these are your responsibilities, and then you're best equipped to act in the best interest of the cooperative as a director, and that you know what your responsibilities are. As with so many things around risk management, it is better to know this information or have this information and never need it, as opposed to need it and not have it. And so my goal here is not to discourage anybody from being on a board of directors. As someone that's been both a member, a staff person, and a board member of a cooperative, being a board member of a cooperative can be one of the most fulfilling experiences you have in a co-op, and so I certainly don't want to discourage anybody from that. So my goal here in providing this information is simply to educate, not to scare, even though Halloween is coming up. So let's move on back to other member rights. So we've covered the two major areas of decision making that impact on the democratic functioning, but they also have impacts on business. But there are a few other situations that are important around member rights versus director rights. So we've covered the major decision points for members and the board, but this puts a lot of pressure on the board to be acting as the steward of the organization and to be anticipating all of these issues and going back to members to find out what could the organization be doing, what could the co-op be doing to best meet those needs, right? So there's obviously communication responsibility on the part of the board, but in some cases, there is going to be the need for members to bring this up in a direct way to the board and have them make a decision on a particular issue. And so the question often gets asked, do members have this right to get the board to meet on a particular issue? And the answer is yes, and that right is protected by the legislation. And so it is possible for a group of members to request that the board call a meeting to decide on a particular bylaw or motion. And this can't just be one member that makes this request. It has to come from at least 10% of the members, and it has to come in writing, and it has to be signed by all of the members that are making the request. And so this is a case where those members want the board to meet to make a decision about that particular issue. And so when the board receives that request, they have to act on it. They're obligated to act on it, and they have to call a board meeting within 21 days. And in some cases, based on the type of decision, they may, once the board meeting is over, they may have to call a member meeting to ratify that decision or to confirm that decision. And if they do that, then they have another 21 days once the board has met to call a member meeting to do that. It's also possible that the members can directly ask the board to call a members meeting, go right to the member meeting point, as opposed to going and asking the board to decide on that. Usually this is done practically in the case where the members are asking to remove a director. Because if they're asking to remove a director, there's often a conflict with trying to go through the board to get that done. And only the members have the power as a whole to remove a director. So they skip over the board piece and go right to the member meeting piece. And only 5% of the members are required to do that. Same thing is required. The request has to come in writing, it has to be signed, and the board is obligated to act. This is not a situation where the board can say to a member, no, this is not, we're not going to do this. This often happens, if you're being faced with this, hopefully this is not a situation that you want to be having regularly, and this is sort of the best practice part of the discussion. I mean, it's great that this exists in the Act, but if your members are having to resort to requisitioning the board to meet to decide on an issue, it may speak to larger issues around the co-op board actually getting effective input from the members, and that it sort of indicates that there may be serious communication breakdown between the board and the membership. Not always, but certainly you want to be gathering input as a board from your membership on a more regular basis to allow members to bring these types of ideas forward for the board to decide on, and that you can be communicating back out to them. And this is important because you don't want to have every decision take place under these sorts of circumstances. Any questions about these other member rights? Okay, so let's talk about, last but not least, staff. So the Co-operative Corporations Act in Ontario doesn't actually have much to say about staff rights and responsibilities. The only thing that it talks about is worker cooperatives, where members are employees of the cooperative, and even then, it's really only limited to definitions. So the Act mostly deals with the democratic functioning of the cooperative. It doesn't deal so much with the business side of it. There are lots of other rules and restrictions around employment rights for staff and also around how the business operates, and those are going to be specific from sector to sector. So certainly anybody that is employed by a cooperative is held to the Employment Standards Act and has those rights under the same human rights and the ability to access those types of avenues that others may not. And it's important to note that staff are ultimately responsible to the board through the senior employee, and that they're protected. The board is also responsible for enacting policies that will limit and protect employees, but also by doing that protect the cooperative. And so these would be things like spending policies for your employees, HR policies around hiring, firing, appropriate behavior, overtime policies, things that impact budget. And those types of policies can provide an extremely important framework for staff. But they also protect the cooperative, because if there's budget implications to any of these, the board's responsibility is to maintain the financial health of the cooperative, and so that's why you might see things like spending policies or overtime policies or lieu time policies in order to make sure that the cooperative is not going to be faced with a negative financial situation because of employment pay, employee payments, or other activities that the employees may do. And a lot of this is just around appropriate decision-making authority. You don't necessarily want a frontline staff person having the authority to spend up to, a very high amount on behalf of the cooperative. The decision-making power should reflect the role in the organization. And so in some cases, the board will have to be the ultimate authority in terms of making some spending decisions, for example. And again, this may depend on the type of business that you're in the sense that some decisions around this will depend on the structure of your cooperative and what type of business that you're in. And it should also be noted that, we talk about the Co-op Act being silent around employee rights issues, and, there are Employment Standards Act and all that sort of thing, but your businesses may also be subject to other rules and restrictions. So say, for example, your cooperative runs a processing facility or some sort of manufacturing facility. There may be environmental laws that business needs to follow, and it's the board's responsibility around legal obligations to make sure that those needs are met. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that the staff are completely unprotected, but it means that from a democratic functioning side of things, they're not necessarily protected. So the last slide that I'll mention around staff, actually there's a few slides here around staff and board. The staff, if you look at the delineation between what staff does and what the board does, the staff's responsibility is to work to fulfill the operational goals and needs of the business. And so the board will hand off strategic direction to decide the strategic direction of the cooperative and hand it off to the staff to operationalize that and actually put it into action. And so it's also important to note that staff may be carrying out functions or have responsibilities as part of the business unit of the cooperative, but actually assist the democratic functioning of the cooperative. And these would be things like it's possible to have a staff person act as your corporate secretary, and they would be responsible for keeping the record books and making sure that all of the records of the cooperative are kept in the proper order and that minutes are taken and that the board is supported. Things like member newsletters or communication out to the membership is sometimes handled by staff within a cooperative. I mean, that's how it works at On Co-op. For example, we have a membership and communications manager that is responsible for communication to the members on behalf of the board. And so it's important to note that, not all of the staff positions that a cooperative may have are responsible solely for the business unit. They may be responsible for helping to make the democratic functioning side of the cooperative work well.